Hey folks, at the time of this video going live, I am currently away on holiday in Canada. In order to provide some sort of content whilst I'm away, I thought it'd be fun to look back at some older lore and theory videos on the channel. Maybe there's an interesting one that you haven't seen before, or perhaps you just want some Zelda lore and theories on in the background. I'm working on some really exciting projects right now, but they'll take a wee bit longer to get finished, and that'll be when I'm back home from this trip. I'll be posting lots from my trip on my socials as well, which are all linked below if you want to follow me, or join my Discord server. Anyway, be sure to go and grab yourself a delicious snack and drink, folks. Send them in for a chance to be featured in a future video. And now, enjoy some good old Zelda lore and theories.
Let's start at a very relevant location, Dragonbone Mire, a boggy corner tucked away in the west of Hebra, not far from Rito Village. Here we can find the half-buried remains of what we can essentially confirm to be a dragon. The name of this location actually helps massively for identifying these remains, as we find identical skeletons in other parts of the kingdom, such as Lanayru in the Gerudo Desert, essentially confirming that they're all dragons of some kind. Additionally, we now find fully intact remains down in the depths, 3 large, presumably dragon remains found directly below the great Leviathan skeletons of the land. As to why they're found in these exact locations, I've done another separate video covering that if you'd like to check it out afterwards. I'll link it below. As for today's focus, dragons as a whole. It's clear that they once roamed free across the land. We find many remains across multiple regions. These weren't just one-off dragons such as the sacred dragons we can currently find, but only few can see, such as Link. These beasts were likely visible to all that lived alongside them. However, we can't put a timestamp on when exactly that time frame was. We can say for sure that it wasn't any time recent history, as we see back to prior to the Great Calamity, as well as even further back through the tapestry, and that doesn't depict any wild dragons, which doesn't rule them out per se, but it doesn't confirm them either. Given how we find many of these remains, I think it's fair to say they're pretty old, and I'm sure with how many are only partially uncovered that there are more where we cannot see. At some point in time, it seems as though dragons roamed free in the wild, nothing like we've seen in past games, with the odd dragon or two appearing as a god or boss. This was different. These dragons existed in great size. The sheer size of some of these rib cages really highlight just how big they were, such as the remains found in Lanayru, as do those found in the Gerudo Desert. They tower Link, and these are often found as just one section of the rib cage that made up the full body. For a full-length scale, the remains found in the depths give us a fascinating look at the honestly terrifying size these creatures would have been, not to mention their potentially intimidating horns, scales, and roars. These were wild dragons, much like the wildlife that roams Hyrule today, and their existence and time in the kingdom, likely before it was ever the Kingdom of Hyrule as it became in the far past, was one that shaped a lot of the old architecture and ruins we see today. Both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom highlighted the significance of dragons across history. The ancient Zonai people worshipped them highly. We see this in their architecture as well as customs. We know that they even had ways to become immortal dragons themselves, which, whilst not confirmed, it is speculated that the 3 sacred dragons we see across the Wilds era games, that they are in fact ancient Zonai that transformed into dragons. Regardless, the Zonai's relationship with dragons appeared as strong as the Hylians to the goddess Hylia. We don't know if the ancient Zonai lived alongside these creatures, but given how long ago it was that the Zonai people prospered, long before the glimpses of King Rauru and his sister Minoru we see, it's very possible that the Zonai people lived in the same time frame as these creatures, explaining their deep connections to the beasts. It's likely they had a far better understanding of them too, perhaps not domesticated, but able to live alongside without conflict. The Zonai were once people of the sky, a place which dragons could reach with ease. It's not far-fetched at all to say that they lived alongside them, as well as, you know, became them at times. The influence of this unseen Dragon Age is still very visible today, with all the dragon-inspired Zonai remains, but it's also present in more subtle ways. In recent times, we have seen these remains being used. Bokoblins and moblins have been seen to use weapons and shields made out of dragon bone. We can find items such as dragon bone boko clubs, bows and shields, crafty wee creations using this pristine dragon bone, presumably for added strength and power, as these tools are a step up from the standard Bokoblin equipment. This is by no means anything major, but it's very interesting to see how the remains find themselves in the modern day. It makes you wonder, did the likes of the Zonai and or anyone else who lived during the Dragon era also create dragon bone equipment? Maybe armor or furniture. It's entirely possible. If Bokoblins are smart enough to figure out that their bones make for good material, I'm sure those of the ancient times of the Dragon era could figure that out as well. Back at Dragonbone Mire, who exactly named it this? Nobody in either game explains, so it's really left down to our imaginations to fill that gap. Perhaps it has been known as this for hundreds of years. We'll never know for sure, but what we do know for sure is that it having this name confirms these remains, along with all the other identical remains as dragons. Where this gets really interesting is the remains we then find deep below Hyrule, in the depths. The previously mentioned dark skeleton remains appear to be full versions of the same remains we find on the surface, with intact skulls and near full-length skeletons. This really underlines just how grand an age this was. The Age of Dragons was made up of beasts at least this large, freely roaming the land and sky. Hundreds to thousands of them, and it might not have been just these slender dragons. We know that at some point in ancient history, the mighty Gleeok held its rightful place in nature. Large winged dragons that were quite territorial and very hostile if threatened. Perhaps these beasts lived in the same age, or at least crossed lifetimes. There are also many different smaller dragons that we see in the flesh across other games in the Zelda timeline. More winged beasts such as Argarok in Twilight Princess, serpents such as Volvagia in Ocarina of Time. Then there's Aquamentus, Valoo, Gleerock, and many more. But they all appear in their own individual time as lonesome dragons. Perhaps in the Unseen Dragon Age, these creatures were also present to some degree. Hyrule's Unseen Dragon Age is one of these things about the last two Zelda games that really interests me. It's never something that's talked about in great detail, or even really at all. I get that the highlight is on the modern day dragons and the Zonai turning into dragons. But the wild dragons, all of these remains, aren't really talked about. It's not highlighting past dragons we've seen, but rather a new kind that we haven't. It's extremely present in the world and environment, and as far as environmental storytelling goes, this is one of the greatest examples. At base value, the developers just laid some remains around the world to look cool, and let us know that dragons once lived, which on its own is really cool. But what this really becomes when you connect all the dragon lore of the Zonai people, the culture they created with other species, and their ways of life. The long dead remains of Hyrule's dragons highlights the sheer detail and depth to these games. We never even seen this dragon age, the time in which these gigantic dragons lived, where they prospered and roamed free, but we know what happened, and can see just how big an impact that's had on Hyrule over the years, from the strong connections to the Zonai people to the modern day influences. Hyrule's Dragon Age is extremely important to the history of this kingdom, and the remains are here as a reminder of just how different the kingdom once was. A land clearly ruled by them at some point in time, in their great numbers, and even greater size. But will we ever see a Zelda game that shows us dragons living in the wild like this great unseen Dragon Age? It's unlikely that we will to this degree, but you never know. Only time will tell.
The story of the Interloper conflict, also known as the Interloper War, is told to us during the events of The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. Factually, the best game to ever be made. We learn of these events after clearing the Lanayru province from the twilight that has crept over it. Once Link has collected all of the light vessels, he is teleported to the Lanayru Spring down by Lake Hylia, and it's here that he then meets the light spirit Lanayru. The spirit thanks Link for his efforts to restore the province and gets right to the point. Link and Midna are on a quest to piece together the fused shadow, a powerful shadow relic that once belonged to Midna. In search of the last piece, the pair came to the Lanayru province. This light spirit has a great knowledge of the relic, including a very significant part of history that not just this light spirit, but all of the others were involved in too. Lanayru tells Link that the dark power he seeks can be found in the Lakebed Temple, in the depths of Lake Hylia, but before he sets off to collect it, he must first hear an important story. He must bear witness to events surrounding the power he is after that transpired long ago. Enter The Legend of Zelda's most creepy cutscene. Lanayru tells the tale of Hyrule's creation to begin with, a retelling and recap of the same story we were told during the events of Ocarina of Time. 3 goddesses formed this land, Din, Nehru and Furore, bringing life, land and order to the world. For many ages, people lived in peace. Until eventually, word of the Sacred Realm became known across Hyrule. This is where our dark interlopers enter the frame. Chronologically speaking, the story of the Dark Thieves begins in a rough time frame. The exact timeline placement isn't known. However, we know that this conflict occurred sometime before the events of Ocarina of Time and sometime after the events of Skyward Sword. For context, Twilight Princess takes place here on the timeline, down the child timeline split. The interloper conflict would have took place somewhere around here. Between Ocarina of Time and Skyward Sword is also a brief time frame known as the Era of Chaos, and it's believed that the interloper conflict took place before the Era of Chaos, as the Sacred Realm was sealed during that time, and was only breached again during the events of Ocarina of Time, when Ganondorf uses Link to break his way into the Sacred Land. The Dark Interlopers were a tribe of sorcerers that excelled in their magic, some of the most powerful and taboo magic ever seen in the history of Hyrule. They excelled in shadow magic. This made them incredibly powerful and naturally dangerous. At this point in time, there was knowledge of a powerful relic somewhere in the kingdom. The 3 golden triangles known as the Triforce, an almighty power that was left behind by the goddesses that created this world before departing for the heavens, leaving the Triforce in what would become known as the Sacred Realm. If one was to obtain the relic, they would essentially have literal control over the kingdom. The presence of the Triforce alone drew out the greed of men, and this began to brew a dark age for Hyrule. A conflict was beginning to take place as many were trying to locate the Triforce and take its divine power all for themselves. Lust and greed fueled this time, and a great war broke out for control of the Sacred Realm and the Triforce. This is where our Dark Thieves became a problem. The tribe of dark sorcerers held an item known as the Fused Shadow, the very same that Link and Midna are after in the present day of Twilight Princess. The Fused Shadow is an extremely powerful shadow magic artifact that was going to be used by the tribe to attempt to take control of the Sacred Realm, the location in which the Triforce could be found. If you need a visual on just how powerful this artifact is in its full form, here is just one thing Midna can do with the full Fused Shadow. If the Interloper tribe were successful in their mission to take control of the Sacred Realm, and of course possession of the Triforce, then Hyrule would have been destined for a certain age of darkness. During these dark, worrying times, the Dark Interlopers grew stronger, and the chance of them being successful grew greater. As fear and worry grew within the soul of the kingdom, the goddesses made a plea. In these trying times for the kingdom, the goddesses reached out to the light spirits of Hyrule, Ordonia, Faron, Eldin, and Lanayru, who we meet throughout the course of Twilight Princess. The light spirits intervened on the plans of the Interlopers and took their fused shadow, sealing it away for the protection of Hyrule. Fragments of the Shadow Relic were sealed within temples, whilst others were sealed away with the Dark Interlopers themselves. Without the complete fused shadow, the tribe were left powerless, and this resulted in the Interlopers being banished to the Twilight Realm, bringing back light and peace to the future of Hyrule. That is the story we are told by the light spirit Lanayru, but why does the spirit not only tell Link this story, but have him witness the horrors of greed and lust? Well, as mentioned in the cutscene, the light spirits have seen what the lust for such a power can do to not only individuals, but society. War broke out over the lust for great powers, and they don't want a repeat of that. One thing that I especially love about this cutscene, on top of its already creeping and disturbing vibes, is how personal the light spirit makes this. Lanayru shows Link this story, but uses versions of himself and his dear friend Ilia to make it all the more personal and deep, really emphasizing the potential dangers that can come with such power, even telling Link that the power is strong enough to consume the hero himself. It's obviously an opinion, but in my opinion, this is the creepiest and most downright chilling cutscene in the entire Zelda series. It's one of, if not my favourite, for the lore it provides us, and how well it was made and presents that lore. The Interloper conflict, whilst looking at it isolated, might not seem like a majorly significant event, as others tried to claim domain over the Sacred Realm and failed as well, but what makes their story all the more significant is what follows in history following their banishment to the Twilight Realm. That's the story of the Interloper conflict, but there's much more to their story in a much wider perspective in terms of what happened afterwards. That place they were banished to, the Twilight Realm, is an alternative existence that exists parallel to Hyrule. The kingdom we know has light, the Twilight Realm has dark. It's a void, otherly world, and the Dark Interlopers being sent here had a lasting effect that essentially builds the entire story of Twilight Princess. So this lore is highly significant. Over many ages following their banishment, the Interlopers and their descendants became known as a race called the Twilight, the beings of the Shadow Realm. The very same kind as Midna. This realm would have its own monarchy system, its own life and society. Prior to the events of this game, Midna was the rightful ruler of the Twilight Realm. She is, the Twilight Princess.
He said the thing.
That was until Zant, blinded with power granted to him by Ganondorf, the King of Evil who was also banished to the Twilight Realm following the events of Ocarina of Time that led into the child timeline split. Ganondorf granted great power to Zant, and filled with greed, the usurper King Zant cursed Midna into an imp form, and took the throne for himself. In her desperate times, she summoned the remaining pieces of the Fused Shadow that were sent here with the interlopers. Whilst powerless without the full, complete Fused Shadow, Midna had a plan. Ganondorf was using Zant to break free from the Twilight Realm, and successfully cloaked Hyrule in twilight, which Midna found out upon her arrival to the Light World. Zant and Ganondorf had already took over. Her plan was to recover the other pieces of the relic, in order to become strong enough to defeat Zant and reclaim her throne. Through the help of Princess Zelda and Link, she sets off on that quest and is ultimately successful in recovering the full Fused Shadow. This is over the course of the first 3 dungeons of the game. Through further setbacks and further challenges, including having to repair the Mirror of Twilight to get back into the Twilight Realm to face Zant, Midna eventually got her moment to defeat the usurper who stole her place. This takes place not long before she and Link sets off to go and face Ganondorf back in the Light World, where ultimately the pair would be successful and save the day. The story of the Dark Interlopers and the conflict they were involved in is one of my favourite wee pieces of Zelda lore, and for a while now I've wanted to do my own lore telling video on the subject. You can, being a Twilight Princess mega fan and all. And I just also really love doing lore dives and storytelling. It's fascinating that the banishment of one tribe would have such a knock-on effect ages down the timeline, so much so that a whole race descended from those thieves who sought after control of the Sacred Realm, only for them to be heavily involved in not only Ganondorf's escape of the realm, but also taking care of that situation as well. Whilst the Twilight Realm is considered the dark side to the light, it has its own darkness and light within. The Twilight people and their society all stemmed from Hyrule's dark thieves who wanted it all. That is the story of Hyrule's Dark Interlopers.
Let's start by examining and exploring the entire area. If you discover this area through the main story, you'll be dropped into the depths by diving down the Death Mountain Chasm, an epic but daunting dive down the blasting heat of the volcano. On the map, this area covers a large range. For context, the size of Goron City on the surface only covers the space here at the abandoned Elden Mine, whereas the Fire Temple and surrounding ruins span over this entire area. When we first reach the Fire Temple, we see the subtitle Lost Gorondia Rediscovered, and ever since reading this, it's had me intrigued as to what lore hides behind this. I hadn't given it tons of thought, but it had been in the back of my mind for the longest time. This Fire Temple is part of a lost settlement or operation of some sorts. We as the player, Link in-game, have rediscovered it. So what exactly is the story that has been lost to time? Across this entire wider area, we can find interesting remains and ruins, broken down bridges across lava pools, mining spots and equipment that are now damaged and not in operation, large Goron statues, possibly depicting the ancient Goron sage seen in the post-dungeon scene with Yunobo, a spring of some kind, as well as building ruins, mostly in rubble. These sort of remains are scattered all across the place. They appear kinda randomly dotted around, but if you consider what all of this would have looked like before falling to the decay of time, then it shapes up as a settlement of sorts. If you talk to a young Goron called Dugby, found in Goron City, you can pick up a short side quest from him called The Ancient City, Gorondia. Long story short, it doesn't actually lead to Gorondia itself. However, Dugby tells Link that it was an ancient city where the Gorons once lived, confirming to us that what we find down here is in fact a lost city, a former home of the Gorons. But what exactly was life like here compared to Goron life in this day and age? Well, the fire temple itself appears to have been some sort of mining operation facility. We find multiple levels, elevators, mine carts, rails to transport them, sorting areas, working areas, and lots of different equipment across the temple. This would have been the heart of all mining done in this wider area. We do see other mining spots elsewhere in the area, but this would have been the hub, the place where the most metal and gems were found and also processed. There is a lot of access to lava here, and I'd assume it was to help smelt and refine the variety of precious goods mined here. Gerondia would have been a hard-working settlement, utilising the immense strength of the Gorons. It would have also been a lot more populated than the Goron city we see in the present day. There was just so much more space, containing a lot of building ruins, so it's safe to assume there was a larger population living down here. It's likely that there was ways to go between Gerondia and the surface, so there was probably a split overall population between the Gorons, but I believe the majority lived down here in the city of Gerondia. But it might not have been all that great. The depths of Hyrule are scary enough at times, but especially in ancient times and below Death Mountain, there may have been threats to consider that we don't see in this current day and age. We find the remains of whatever these massive creatures once were. There are actually quite a lot of skeletal remains found across Death Mountain and the depths of Death Mountain. It's been heavily speculated that these were once dragons or leviathans of some kind, so it's very possible that in ancient times, back when the city of Gerondia was alive and flourishing, that creatures like these were also alive and flourishing. There might have also been the likes of Dodongos, fire-breathing lizards that have appeared a good few times across the series. The dungeon boss of Ocarina of Time's Dodongo's Cavern, also found on Death Mountain, being King Dodongo. We don't find any in the present day, but they're definitely a staple of Death Mountain, so it's extremely likely that they were lurking down here at some point in time. So whilst life down here was likely hard-working, filled with lots of friends and family, it was also likely more dangerous, or at least somewhere you had to be cautious and keep an eye out for threats. But other than that, I imagine life was fairly similar. We also need to consider the possible connections Gerondia may have to past Goron settlements seen in other Zelda games, particularly Goron City seen in Ocarina of Time and the Goron Mines seen in Twilight Princess. Both Goron operations and settlements within and on Death Mountain, both with sections that go deeper into the mountain. In Ocarina of Time, Goron City can be found just on the inside of the mountain, not particularly deep within, but you can access the deeper sections as there is a passage to the mountain crater, also known as the Death Mountain Summit, which leads Link to the Fire Temple of Ocarina of Time, also home to the dragon boss of the dungeon, Volvagia. Perhaps that's what these bones are. The temple in this game isn't a mining operation like seen in Tears of the Kingdom, rather a classic Zelda dungeon. It has prison cells, mazes, puzzles, and typical dungeon rooms, so it's not one-for-one connected apart from the fact it's found within the deeper areas of the mountain. As for Twilight Princess, the Goron settlement here is a bit more spread between the inside and outside. We see them set up on the route to the actual mines, inside rooms as well as outside areas such as hot springs. The mines themselves serve as the game's second dungeon, and are a large expansive mining operation, similar to the purpose of the Fire Temple in Tears of the Kingdom. Except these mines go in between the insides of the mountain and outside. It's quite complex and uses technology to operate, as well as rooms for the Goron Elders throughout the operation. Between these two past locations, I'd connect the locations seen in Tears of the Kingdom more with Ocarina of Time, but at the same time, geographical exacts do vary quite a lot between Zelda games, so it's entirely possible that all of this is connected in some way or another. Geography-wise, I feel Ocarina of Time matches up a bit more. However, I feel Twilight Princess matches up a bit more in terms of the operation. They're both mining facilities as well as homes. Stuff like this does tend to blend a little over the games and years in terms of in-game lore, so it's not something to overthink massively, but definitely consider that these could all be connected to some degree, even if it's just similarities. So why and how did such a mighty settlement free from the threats of the surface fall into such decay? Admittedly, Yeah, there was probably threats down below, but you can apply that to anywhere really. The Gorons are also extremely strong and well organised, so I don't think any threats down here would have just wiped them out. Yeah, they would have had to deal with them, but I couldn't see that being the reason for the fall of this city. There is one major hint, which may give us an answer. In Princess Zelda's 12th memory from her time in the ancient past, during the era of founding, we see the ancient sages giving reports on the status of settlements in the time which Ganondorf is taking over the kingdom with his demon army. We hear the report that the last free village of Gerudo Desert has fallen, indicating that Ganondorf and his demon army are rampaging across the kingdom far and wide, overwhelming them with his terrifying numbers and vicious minions. It's not outright said, but I'd say it's a very safe assumption to make that these attacks were kingdom-wide, or at least to the major settlements and their surrounding areas, meaning it's rather likely that Ganondorf targeted the Gorons at some point. Despite being deep beneath Death Mountain, his minions would find a way to get down there and overwhelm them. We know Ganondorf's minions can easily survive down here despite the heat, so what I'm thinking is that this is the reason Gerondia fell. It was a victim of Ganondorf's assault on the kingdom in ancient times. The events leading up to the summit of the Imprisoning War, which concluded with King Rauru sacrificing his physical form in order to seal the King of Evil, stopping him from destroying Hyrule and making it his own. As to why the Gorons didn't just continue to live and operate out of here following all of that, I would imagine that their overall population fell significantly following Ganondorf's assault on the kingdom, making this large space a little too big for the now much smaller population. Ganondorf is an evil man. What he done to Hyrule in this time is truly horrific, and I believe that it caused the Gorons to make the space on the surface of the mountain their primary settlement, leaving Gerondia to ruin. I personally believe that Lost Gerondia was once this entire area in the depths of Death Mountain, spanning from the chasm drop all the way to the area in the front of the Fire Temple, and the temple itself. A much larger settlement than the Goron city of today's age, somewhere that was active when there were a lot more Gorons present. I believe they not only lived here, but also worked here as miners, getting precious metals and valuable gems to trade and sell across the kingdom of Hyrule. We see that they still do this in the current day. I just believe in the ancient past, they did it down here. It's also likely there was still some sort of settlement on the surface levels of the mountain, but I believe a larger and more primary settlement was found down inside the mountain, just as we've seen in past games. I really love these sort of mysteries within the world lore of Zelda games. I even did a similar video about a potential lost city of the Gerudo Desert a few months back, if you'd be interested in checking that out after this one. I'll have it linked below. But for now, that's my thoughts on the lost city of Gerondia. This wild conspiracy theory begins with our first meeting with Navi, Link, the child not from Kokiri Forest, but raised there following being left by his mother fleeing warfare, grew up without a fairy companion, something every other child here did. They all get one, but Link didn't until one fateful day where an outsider fairy summoned by the Great Deku Tree was paired with the soon-to-be hero. Navi is known as the fairy without a child, likely meaning that Navi herself is an outsider. This whole assignment happened because the Great Deku Tree, guardian spirit of the forest, could sense the dangers coming to Hyrule. He asked Navi to find Link and bring him to him, which happens to kick off the adventure. Navi is Link's companion for the entirety of the game, primarily acting as a source of useful information, but also as a bit of a guide. And this is where our first suspicion comes from, that Navi could be evil. Navi knows a little too much. Every enemy we encounter, every dungeon we traverse, Navi knows the ins and outs. Maybe not literally, but she is very knowledgeable on a lot of this. How would Navi, a fairy of the forest, know so much regarding outside of the forest? Never mind the fact some of this stuff is connected to Ganondorf and his takeover. Navi can explain to Link how to beat enemies via their weaknesses, as well as some of their strategies. When it comes to dungeons, Navi is more than full of facts regarding the location and even their bosses. Little sus, don't you think? Well, let's keep going. Well, actually, let's go all the way towards the ending stages of the game, and I'll meet you there. Shortly before venturing to Ganondorf's mighty castle 7 years in the future, we encounter Sheik in the Temple of Time, who is quickly revealed to actually be Princess Zelda, in disguise. Keywords, in disguise. Just mere moments after Zelda reveals herself to Link and Navi, Ganondorf is onto her and swiftly acts and captures her, bringing the princess straight to its castle. But how on earth did Ganondorf know that quickly? Well, the belief is that it was to do with the powers of the Triforce and instantly sensing Princess Zelda's Triforce of Wisdom, but let's be real here. I know that's kind of hard to say in terms of Zelda, but let's be real here. She had that within her the entire time. How does simply wearing the Sheik outfit mask that? I guess you could argue that this could be some unknown mysterious Sheikah technology or magic going on here, but I'm not completely sold on that. As far as we're showing, it's basically an outfit and that Zelda is combat trained or trained in some sort of Sheikah ways, but it's still Zelda underneath that. Rather, I like where this conspiracy theory takes it and points the finger to Navi, our sus little friend. So, how on earth did Ganondorf know? Well, this theory suggests that Navi actually informed Ganondorf, likely through some sort of fairy magic or, I don't know, Navi GPS. I mean, Navi is short for navigation, and in a way, they can use a GPS. Anyway, somehow, Navi was able to inform her true master and reveal Princess Zelda's location. That's right, Navi works for Ganondorf. All of the knowledge on evils across Hyrule, the detailed descriptions of the dark dungeons and their bosses, and even how to beat them, the capture of Princess Zelda. It could all add up. She's leading Link to Ganondorf, making sure he gets there. But it doesn't stop there. In the final battle of the game against Ganon, following the collapse of Ganondorf's castle, Navi says the line, "This time we fight together," but then proceeds to play no actual role in the battle other than keeping the boss in view. How is that any different from the rest of this adventure and previous boss battles? It's not. Not long before this, right before the fight against Ganondorf, Navi is supposedly locked out of helping Link due to the dark powers of Ganondorf. Yeah. Right before the whole "this time we fight together," Navi actually apologises for not being able to help just moments ago, and commits to fighting together this time, and like I said, then proceeds to do nothing extra or more helpful than across the entire game. Navi basically makes sure that Link makes it to Ganondorf. I mean, Link does possess the Triforce of Courage, and on his own, he might have been beat by one of these bosses, dungeons, or many dangers across the land. Navi's helping Ganondorf make sure Link gets to him, all whilst getting Princess Zelda exposed as well. She backs off during the battle with Ganondorf, as her work is done at this point. She helped Ganondorf get hold of Princess Zelda already, and at this point now has Link in combat for Ganondorf. Of course she wouldn't help the hero, she made sure that Link would make it to Ganondorf. That's why she helps him throughout the quest, but also why she knows so much. If you took any other fairy from one of the actual Kokiri children in the forest, I guarantee you they wouldn't have the encyclopedia of knowledge that Navi does regarding these enemies, dungeons, and bosses. Navi is evil. Oh, and this could even explain the ending of the game where Navi just flies away without a single word to Link. They part ways after Link is sent back in time, and this very well could be because Navi failed Ganondorf. She knows that her master's fate is now going to be in the hands of the royal family. The sequel to this story, Majora's Mask, even begins with Link seeking for his former companion Navi, but without finding her. If Navi were truly on the hero's side, why would she leave after this adventure? Sure, you can call it destiny, and I'd accept that with any other companion like Fi or Midna, but fairies stay with Kokiri children, so why can't Navi just stay with Link? I mean, he was practically raised as one. He was raised as one. Because she is evil, and was only there to make sure that Link got to her master, Ganondorf. Okay, that is my amplified presentation on the comments, obviously with adding in some of my own points here and there and generally expanding upon what was said, building upon the original idea. It's a pretty convincing theory in my opinion. However, it does beg some questions that must be asked. The big one for me would be, how does an evil fairy get in contact with the Great Deku Tree in the first place? It's totally possible that Navi is evil and works for Ganondorf, but if that is true, how did Navi get here? Well, one idea that could work is that Navi was previously pure and not evil from the beginning, then for unknown reasons got banished and obviously did something evil and teamed up with Ganondorf, only to then play a card from Ganondorf's book and pledge false allegiance to the Great Deku Tree and convince the Mighty Guardian that Navi was once again pure, but in reality was on a big infiltration mission. That idea could be slightly changed in a few different ways. Maybe Navi was evil from the get-go and just infiltrated the Lost Woods and the Kokiri Forest and convinced the Great Deku Tree that she was pure. Who knows? It's probably the biggest hole in this entire theory, and it's not really possible to fill it. Other small questions that could be asked are along the lines of, sure, but can you really prove this isn't all in good spirits and just highly coincidental? And the answer would be, no, we can't prove that either. It is at the end of the day a conspiracy theory, in my eyes anyway. That's how I interpreted all of this. Oh, and one additional point to the video, if Navi is evil, that could explain why she's arguably one of the most annoying companions in the series. Now I hear the Navi lover comments saying, but she's a fairy, Navi is perfect.
Hey, listen!
What's that?
Watch out!
Oh, couldn't hear ya. Annoying, right? Look around. Far and wide across the vast desert we find old ruins. Some are merely stone poking out of the sand, and others are more notable landmarks such as the West Barrens, the Arbiter's Grounds, and so on. But they're all mostly buried in the sand in one way or another. Very few actually show their full structures, like Gerudo Town and the North Gerudo Ruins do. Even then, Gerudo Town has shown us that there was more below which we didn't know about until Tears of the Kingdom came out. In fact, the release of Tears of the Kingdom has greatly expanded the mysterious ruins of the desert. The Desert Rift, for example, reveals a previously completely buried trench of ruins, which we don't really know what they were for. There are also the likes of the ancient altar ruins, the prison ruins, and many sinkholes which lead to caves with, you guessed it, more ruins. So much of this feels randomly dotted across the desert, places which are rather hard to reach without a sand seal or zonai build. And it's not even a case of enemies being everywhere on the routes to these locations. A lot of the time it's just the terrain is too all over the place, and in recent times sinking in some spots to make travel possible, forcing you to go out of your way, which then does lead to enemies. So why were these locations built so far and wide in arguably the least accessible region? Between Gerudo Town, the Lightning Temple, Arbiter's Grounds, the jail, the altar ruins, the East and West Barrens, along with many other smaller locations, why were they not built closer to each other in the more accessible parts of the region? There's enough room to fit at least a few in, but yet they were built in the far reaches. It doesn't quite make sense. Now, as a world lore enthusiast, this really caught my interest, so I began researching as well as brainstorming about why this could be, and also just why there's so many random ruins across the desert. My mind was instantly drawn to lost cities, ancient civilizations that have been forgotten in time, both real-life examples across the world, as well as fictional examples, but none more apparent than the examples within the Zelda series itself. For example, the long-lost Zonai tribe of Faron was arguably Breath of the Wild's biggest mystery, a group lost to time with a large amount of ruins left behind, now mostly taken over by nature, along with many other mysterious and unexplained ruins and remains found throughout the series. Could there be something similar hiding in the Gerudo Desert's long history? I think so. You see, Gerudo Town is the only really stable and standing location across the entire desert. Its foundations and underground section hold strong in the harsh and constantly changing desert setting. Whether this is because it was built on the most stable part, or just because it's extremely well built in comparison to the rest, I'm not sure. However, it's just odd that there are so many other ruins, all seemingly significant at some point in time, as well as going off their names. A jail, a large altar, the Arbiter's grounds, a more high security level prison, and like mentioned, many other large ruins. There is of course the Lightning Temple as well, which is a bit more mysterious than the other ruins as this one has a built-in mechanic, albeit a very complex one to figure out, which raises it from the depths of the desert. Perhaps this was built to have the ability to hide the temple, or perhaps just as a failsafe in the event it does ever become buried deep below. But all of this is leading up to one big proposal I have. The Lost City of Gerudo Desert. Think about it. Sand moves and shifts over the course of time. Structures built on less stable parts of the sand could easily fall deep down. This is no more evident than right here in the Gerudo Desert. Genuinely tons of ruins, many significant ones as well, which are just buried beneath the sand, with potentially a lot more deep below them. We also see that sinkholes are capable of opening up here, making it all the more possible that there are even more ruins which we just can't see, as they already sunk down long before we got here. Even just the developments between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom tells us a lot about how little we might truly know about this place. There is only a matter of around 4 to maybe 8 years between these games at a guesstimate, and yet we discover so much which has just opened up from beneath the sand. How can we say that there aren't tons more out there? Or should I say below there? There are certainly tons of seemingly small ruins poking out from the sand, but what's to say that's not just the top of a much larger structure buried below? Nothing. It's possible. In fact, it's very possible. If we look to our real world, we see cases and theories exactly like this. Over the course of time, cities, towns and civilizations fall and rise. Their work can be lost to time and the environment. In a terrain like sand, stone can easily be buried over time and lost unless dug up. There are quite a few real-life theories about large, ancient cities being somewhere beneath our sand. Sometimes ruins are found, and they are believed to be connected to these lost cities. I am somebody who is absolutely fascinated by these stories and discoveries. Given the Zelda team's amazing work and attention to detail when it comes to world lore and environmental details, I honestly would not be surprised if a lot of these ruins were made with the inspiration of a lost city or settlement behind them. I don't know, man. It just feels odd that there are all of these landmark ruins across the desert, just dotted around, seemingly not connected. I think that is because back in a time long ago when the Gerudo Desert took on a different formation, these landmark and small ruins far and wide all linked up to form a mighty Gerudo city, spanning across the entirety of the desert. I feel even more confident in this possibility given the ropey relationship between the Gerudo and their land with the rest of Hyrule. Over the many, many years this kingdom and its neighbouring regions have existed, the tensions between the royal family of Hyrule and the Gerudo, particularly when Ganondorf is around to lead them, is quite tense, and at certain times, the two are completely cut off from each other, as seen prior to Ocarina of Time's events. Like I said at the beginning of the video, this Zelda theory is out there. It's on the verge of crackpot conspiracy theorist behaviour. I am fully aware how out there and mad this probably sounds, but considering what all of these ancient ruins are, and would have been in their prime, it adds up in my opinion. It just feels too odd for them to be that separated. A central core with Gerudo Town, A jail not too far, but not too close. Room for more settlements with the barren ruins on the east and west, and the other small ruins all across. The big main home for the altar, which was perhaps some form of worship in ancient Gerudo culture. A much higher level prison in the Arbiter's grounds, basing it off the location, Arbiter's grounds seen in Twilight Princess. And then of course, the Lightning Temple, the holy grail of Gerudo land. I haven't even mentioned all the extremely small ruins, which are basically just bits and pieces scattered across the desert, but they definitely come into this as well. Like I previously said, they probably made up a lot of settlements and places for people to live. This, for me, is arguably the greatest mystery this kingdom has to offer. So little is known about these ruins of the desert, and it breeds so much fascinating ground to explore and dive into as a world lore fanatic, as well as open up the theory side of things and truly investigate what is now not much more than lost history. The beginning of the Blade's story dates back to before the events of Skyward Sword. Long before we kick off our adventure, back when humanity lived on the surface, an evil demon tribe led by Demise invaded the peaceful surface, bursting through the crusts of the earth to unleash chaos. In order to protect her people, the goddess Hylia created a safe haven high in the heavens, sending her people skyward, but also some relics. Not only was the sacred Triforce sent to the heavens, but also a blade known as the Goddess Sword. Both were secured within the giant goddess statue. This was also sent to the heavens to keep out of reach from the evils on the surface. Not too far into the story we play, following the wing ceremony, Princess Zelda is swept into the abyss down below after being caught in a tornado. Link is fortunately recovered after also losing his bearings, though he must take a rest. And during that rest, a voice calls out in his sleep. Fi calls out to Link, waking him up in the middle of the night to follow. Link is woken by this mysterious purple figure who leads him to the goddess statue. It's within here that we first see what would go on to become the Master Sword. This is where Link draws the Goddess Sword. He is the chosen hero, and this is explained to him by Fi, as well as his quest to go and rescue Zelda as Headmaster Gaepora joins them within the statue. Following this, Link sets off on his big quest to venture the surface. This first half of the story takes him through the first few dungeons, all using the Goddess Sword. However, it's in the second half of the story that the blade begins to change. The second half of the story sees Link seeking out 3 sacred flames. This is in order to purify and upgrade the Goddess Sword, as in order to access the Gate of Time at the Sealed Temple, Link must have the Master Sword. The first flame sought out is Furore's Flame, located within the ancient Cistern dungeon, protected and looked over by the sacred dragon Faron. The process of upgrading the blade is intense. Link holds the Goddess Sword out and allows the bright green flame to become one with the blade. This doubles the damage dealt by the blade, and also gives it a slightly new look and name. From here, it's known as the Goddess Longsword, but this is just one of 3 sacred flame upgrades. The next is Nehru's Flame, found on the sand ship and looked over by the sacred dragon Lanayru. The same process is repeated, and the Goddess Longsword is upgraded into the Goddess White Sword. Another slightly new look, and some new abilities this time, such as enhancements to the dowsing tool, allowing Link to search for rupees, treasure, gratitude crystals, and goddess cubes with the blade. The third and final flame upgrade is Din's Flame, located deep within the Fire Sanctuary, looked over by the sacred dragon Eldin. This is one of the most significant upgrades and moments in Zelda lore. This upgrade turns the Goddess White Sword into the Master Sword, tripling the strength, giving it the power to repel evil, as well as create and use the new Gate of Time in the Sealed Temple. This gives Link the Master Sword, our very first look at the blade chronologically, but this isn't the final upgrade. Whilst it's the final flame to strengthen the sword, there is one more upgrade before the blade becomes the true Master Sword. Once Link ventures through the newly accessible Gate of Time, back into the past to meet Princess Zelda who sealed herself in this time, with the power of the Triforce and presence of the goddess, Zelda gives the Master Sword her divine blessing, turning the blade into the true Master Sword. A blade now capable of defeating Demise. This is now the same blade that we find across the rest of the series. But just how has this one sacred blade made its way through time, across thousands of years, multiple adventures, against many foes? Well, that is shown to us at the end of the game. After Link uses the newly forged True Master Sword to battle Demise and inevitably defeat him, the remains of the Demon King are absorbed within the blade, trapping his essence until it fades away. Following the battle, Link reunites with Zelda, Impa and Groose within the sealed temple. Peace has been restored at last, but there is one more job to do. Lay the blade to rest. It's here that Fi informs Link that despite their grand adventure together, it's time for them to part. Fi, who was essentially a robot to speak to with when we first met them, has gone on to become a true companion to Link. But it's here the pair must part. When the Master Sword is laid to rest, the spirit within the blade must rest too, for all of time. Fi's duty, set out by the goddess Hylia many years ago, has been fulfilled, and is now due to remain within the blade for the rest of time. Fi's farewell is one of the most emotional scenes in the entire Zelda series, and is a bittersweet ending to the origin story of the Master Sword. Throughout time, it goes on to be discovered in various temples, hidden locations, and in the protection and watch of the royal family of Hyrule. That blade that we discovered in adventures like Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess is the very same blade that we forged in Skyward Sword. From the Goddess Sword to the Goddess Longsword, to the Goddess White Sword, to the Master Sword, to the then complete form, the true Master Sword. It was Link himself who created the Master Sword as we know it, and the spirit within the blade still lives on. In a few other games much further down the Zelda timeline from Skyward Sword, we see the blade glow blue, with Princess Zelda herself even being able to understand the blade's form of communication, which makes sense considering Zelda has the blood of the goddess, and Fi was part of the goddess's plan when she sent the humans skyward, along with the Triforce and Goddess Sword. Skyward Sword tells many origin stories. For me personally, the story of the Blade of Evil's Bane's creation is the most fascinating. I just absolutely love this story.